The real story. Horror. Only. At Mr. Scare.
I have always believed that the past is a wild beast. Some days, it sleeps peacefully, curled up in the shadows of our memory. But on other days, it wakes, its claws sharp and merciless, tearing through everything you thought you had buried. I have spent 10 years living with such a beast, and this year, it came back to life. It happened in a small Midwestern town, the kind of quiet place where a single crime lingers in people's minds for decades. They don't forget. They don't want to forget, especially when it's a string of murders, ones that have never been solved. The summer of 2003. Our town was shaken by a series of disappearances. 6 people, all women, vanished without a trace. No bodies, no witnesses, no clues. All that remained were empty apartments, discarded shoes by the door, half-eaten meals on kitchen tables, and doors locked from the inside. The police called him the Silent One because he left nothing behind. No sounds, no struggle, no descriptions from neighbors or passers-by. It was as if those 6 women had never existed. He came in silence. He took them, and then he disappeared into the darkness. The investigation dragged on for 2 years, but no one was ever caught. The case was filed away among countless other unsolved mysteries. People learned to live with it, as if it was just another part of our town. But then, 10 years later, it happened again. A 7th victim. Her name was Lena Parker, a 25-year-old journalism student visiting the town as an intern. Lena was investigating the Silent One when she disappeared on June 5, 2013. And just like the others, she left behind nothing, no witnesses, no struggle, no evidence. The town panicked. Whispers spread through the streets. He's back. But I didn't believe it. Something felt wrong, and I had to find out what. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm an investigative journalist. I have spent more than a decade chasing this case. And now that it has resurfaced, I know I can't stay on the sidelines. I need to know what happened to Lena Parker, and I have no idea that I'm walking straight into a nightmare. Lena Parker wasn't just any ordinary woman. I knew it the moment I flipped through her notes. She had an obsession with the Silent One, not the way journalists chase after a headline, but something deeper, something unsettling. She dug into this case in a way no one else had before. I could feel that obsession in the pages of her old notebooks, the ones she had left behind in her rented apartment. A place that now felt disturbingly empty, as if she had never even lived there. Scattered across those pages were chilling observations. Why did they vanish without a trace? No blood, no signs of struggle. Why didn't anyone hear anything? No screams, no forced entry. He doesn't kill them right away. So, what does he do? Those were the same questions I had been asking myself for years. But then there was one final entry, one that made my stomach twist. He's not a ghost. He didn't disappear. He stopped. But why? If he was never caught, then where is he now? Lena had figured something out, and I needed to know what before she vanished. I went to her apartment, a small, modest place on the outskirts of town. Everything inside was untouched, yet something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but there was a presence in the air, as if someone had been here recently. No signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no chaos. But the window was cracked open, and no one had lived here for 2 weeks. On the table, a coffee cup, the rim still stained with lipstick. Lena had left everything as if she had planned to return, but she never did. I combed through her notes, flipping through pages, searching for anything she might have left behind. Then, I found it. A photograph, tucked behind a book on the shelf. An old faded image of a middle-aged man with piercing eyes, standing beside a little girl, no older than 6. I turned the photo over. There, in shaky handwriting, was a single sentence. I miss my father. I spent the next few days digging. It took time, but eventually I found him. His name was Samuel Grayson, and he was the prime suspect in the Silent One's case, 20 years ago. Samuel had once been a respected educator, a pillar of the town, a man people trusted. But there was something most didn't know. He had an adopted daughter, a little girl who mysteriously vanished in 1993. No one ever proved he had anything to do with it. No evidence, no witnesses, nothing. Then one day, he disappeared, gone. No one knew where he went. And 10 years later, the disappearances started again. I looked back at the photograph, my fingers going numb. Lena Parker wasn't just another missing woman. She was connected to him, and for the first time, a terrifying thought crept into my mind. Lena wasn't supposed to be the 7th victim. She might have been the first. I couldn't take my eyes off the photograph. Samuel Grayson, and the little girl in the picture. There was no doubt about it. That girl was Lena Parker. It felt like I had just stepped through an invisible door into a reality I had never considered before. I had believed Lena was simply a journalist investigating the Silent One. But in truth, she was much more than that. She wasn't just interested in the case. She had lived it. I needed to dig deeper, but I couldn't do it alone. I didn't have access to police records. I needed someone who did. James Carter was one of my closest friends, a detective. A tall, broad-shouldered black man with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity. Though beneath his hardened exterior, there was always something steady, something solid. We'd met years ago when I was just a rookie journalist, chasing after any case that smelled of scandal. James didn't trust easily, but once you earned his loyalty, he had your back. We had worked together on more cases than I could count, me as the reporter, him as the cop. We had an unspoken agreement. I wouldn't leak information that could compromise his investigations, and in return, he would help me when I needed it. And right now, I needed him. I called James. He picked up immediately. "You do realize what time it is, right?" His voice was rough with exhaustion. "I know, but this is important." A sigh. "Let me guess. The Silent One again?" "It's more than that." I hesitated. "I think I found something strange." A brief silence. Then his voice sharpened. "Where are you?" 30 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other in a small diner near the precinct. James walked in still in uniform. His jacket was rumpled, probably from a long shift. He dropped into the booth across from me, setting down a steaming cup of black coffee. "All right," he said, crossing his arms. "Talk." I slid the photograph across the table. James picked it up, squinting at it. "This girl," he said slowly. "Who is she?" "Lena Parker." James frowned. "The journalist?" I nodded. "And the man?" "Samuel Grayson." James froze, his expression darkened. "You're messing with me." I wish I was. My voice was low, steady. "I don't think Lena Parker is her real name." I took a breath. "I think she's his daughter." James set the photo down, his fingers resting on the edge of it. His jaw was tight. "You have proof?" "Not yet." I met his gaze. "That's why I need you." James leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. "What do you want me to do?" "I need you to pull records on missing children from 20 years ago, specifically the early 90s. I think Lena..." I corrected myself. "I think Emily Grayson disappeared as a child, then came back with a new identity. James studied me for a long moment. Then, without another word, he got up. "Wait here." He returned almost an hour later. His face was unreadable. He sat down and slid a manila folder across the table. "You were right, Ethan." I opened the file, my eyes scanning the words, my stomach tightening with each line. Missing person report, May 14, 1993. Name, Emily Grayson. Age, 6. Status, missing. No evidence of abduction. No remains recovered. I swallowed hard. Lena Parker was Emily Grayson. She wasn't a journalist looking for the truth. She was the truth. And if that was the case, where had she been for the 7 years before she reappeared under a new name? James exhaled sharply. "What the hell do you think happened to her?" I shook my head, my throat was dry. "I don't know." I paused. "But I don't think she went missing 2 weeks ago." James narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" I looked up at him. "She's been missing for over 20 years. I thought back to Lena's notes. "He doesn't kill them right away, so what does he do?" He stopped. "But why?" And suddenly I had my answer. He didn't kill them right away because he kept them. And Lena, Emily Grayson, may have been the only one who survived. Not because she escaped, because she had been trained to become him. I went back to Lena's apartment, one last time. I was looking for something different now. Not clues about who took her, but clues about where she had gone. Everything was the same as before, except for one thing. Under the bed, stuffed deep into the corner, I found a scrap of paper, an address, an abandoned house on the outskirts of town, and underneath it, scrawled in jagged handwriting, where it all began. I had been wrong about everything. Lena Parker wasn't a victim. She was the imitator, and she was coming back to finish what her father started. James was watching me as I stood up, the note clutched in my fist. "What are you gonna do?" he asked. I shoved the paper into my pocket. "I'm going there." James frowned. "You're not seriously going alone." "I don't have time to wait." He held my gaze for a moment. Then finally, he grabbed his jacket. "If you're going," he muttered, "I'm coming with you." We drove in silence. James's car sped down the highway, leaving the city lights behind. Neither of us spoke, but the tension in the air was heavy, almost suffocating. James glanced at me a few times, but I wasn't paying attention. I was too busy trying to piece it all together. Lena Parker, or rather Emily Grayson, wasn't a journalist investigating the silent one. She was the case. She wasn't the next victim. She was the killer. And now, she had returned to finish what her father started 20 years ago. But why? Why, after all these years, did she start killing again? Why now? I didn't have the answer. But I knew one thing for sure. The house we were heading toward, the one marked on that scrap of paper, held whatever pieces were missing from this puzzle. James tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You sure this is a good idea, Ethan?" I didn't answer right away. I stared out the window, watching the scenery shift from city streets to vast, empty fields. "I don't think it's a good idea," I admitted, "but I don't think we have a choice." The house appeared on the horizon within minutes. It stood alone in the middle of an open field, abandoned and forgotten. Broken windows, rotting wood, a gaping hole in the roof, like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. It wasn't particularly eerie, just old, decaying, and yet, something about it felt wrong. James pulled onto the dirt road leading up to the house. "This is the place?" he asked. I checked the address on the note. A perfect match. I nodded. We stepped out of his car. Dry grass crunched beneath our feet as we made our way toward the house. The front door was slightly ajar. Someone had been here before us. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Moonlight streamed through broken windows, casting fractured shadows along the peeling wallpaper. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. illuminating warped floorboards and scattered debris. James reached for his gun. "If someone's here, we need to be careful," he murmured. I didn't argue. I had the distinct feeling we weren't alone. We moved through the house cautiously. It had been abandoned for years, but signs of recent activity were everywhere. Shifts in the dust, footprints in the dirt, objects moved ever so slightly out of place. On the wall, I noticed an old photograph of a family of 4. The father, smiling, his hand resting on the shoulder of a little girl who looked exactly like Lena Parker. I swallowed hard. This was Samuel Grayson's house. James frowned. Then why wasn't he in the police records? Why is there no trace of him after Emily disappeared? I had no answer, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A note on the living room table. Unlike everything else in the house, it wasn't covered in dust. It was new. Someone had placed it there recently. I picked it up, running my fingers over the fresh ink. The message was short. "We're almost finished." I turned to James. She was here. James tightened his grip on his gun, and she might still be. We kept searching. The house wasn't big, but it was filled with disturbing details. Fresh footprints in the dust, faint impressions on the couch, as if someone had been sitting there recently. A mug in the kitchen sink, still damp. Someone had been living here, or waiting. James made his way toward the end of the hallway, stopping in front of a small door. "This place has a basement," he muttered. I felt a chill creep up my spine. James tested the doorknob, twisting it slowly. The door creaked open. A staircase led down into absolute darkness. The air was thick, stale, like a secret kept for too long. James shined his flashlight down the steps. "You coming?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "We've come this far." The basement was bigger than I expected. Concrete walls, cold cement floors. But what caught my attention was a wooden table in the center of the room, and on that table, a photograph. Not old, not faded, a recent photograph. Of me. James stepped forward, shining his light over it. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. I felt my stomach drop. Lena Parker knew we were coming. She had planned for this. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the room for anything else. Then in the far corner, something caught my eye. A safe. Old, rusted shut, dust-covered. It had been locked for years, but carved into the metal was an inscription. "Where Father kept his secrets." I glanced at James. "Can you get this open?" He exhaled, then grabbed a metal rod from the floor. "I can try." James swung hard. The first hit barely made a dent. The second cracked the rust. By the third, the lock snapped open. The safe door creaked as it swung outward. Inside, stacked neatly, were old files, aged paper, yellowing photographs, and beneath it all, a journal. I picked it up with trembling hands. The handwriting was erratic, unstable. I read the first line. "I taught her everything. I prepared her for this day. She will finish what I could not." My heart pounded. I flipped another page. A photograph was tucked between the sheets of paper. A little girl with dark brown hair and an innocent smile. Emily Grayson. I turned the picture over. Scrawled on the back in messy, frantic handwriting, "If you're reading this, my child, I know you will not disappoint me." I looked up at James. Everything clicked into place. Lena Parker wasn't a victim. She was a killer. And her father, Samuel Grayson, had spent years grooming her for this. She wasn't just imitating the silent one. She was continuing his legacy. Then, a sound. From behind us, James whipped around, gun raised. And in the dim, flickering glow of our flashlights, she was there. Lena Parker. She stood at the top of the basement stairs, her eyes cold, unblinking, a faint smile on her lips. "Hello, Ethan," she said softly. I stopped breathing. She took a slow step forward. It's time. Lena Parker stood there, right at the basement doorway. The beam of my flashlight trembled in my hand, casting a stark glow on her face. She didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid. She just smiled. Not at me, at herself. "Hello, Ethan," she said. Her voice was eerily calm. James stood beside me, his face rigid with tension. "Don't move, Lena," he warned. But Lena didn't seem to care. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes glimmering with something unsettling under the dim basement light. "I've been waiting for this moment," she whispered, as if savoring every syllable. A cold chill ran down my spine. She stepped forward, descending the first stair, slowly, deliberately, as if she were relishing the tension. James immediately blocked my path, positioning himself between us. "Stay where you are, Lena," he repeated. Lena just smiled. "James, you don't really think I'm dangerous, do you?" I looked into her eyes, and I realized she didn't need a weapon. She was the weapon. I swallowed hard. "You did all of this?" I said, my voice steady. "You weren't the seventh victim. You were the first." Lena blinked. Then, a soft chuckle escaped her lips. "Oh, you finally figured it out." She pressed a hand to her mouth, as if relishing the taste of the truth being spoken aloud. "I wondered how long it would take you." She took another step forward. James instinctively moved back, keeping me shielded behind him. But Lena didn't stop. She stared at me, her smile fading ever so slightly. "When I was a child," she began, her voice soft, "my father taught me many things." She spoke like she was telling a bedtime story. "He taught me how to listen, how to wait, how to understand people." Her gaze drifted downward, lost in memory. "He told me the world is full of people who deserve to die." Her eyes lifted, dark and empty. "And I'm just finishing his work." A heavy silence settled over the room. James glanced at me, then back at Lena. She stood there unmoving. No regret, no fear, just calm certainty. My heart pounded. "Lena," I said carefully, keeping my voice level, "you don't have to do this." She tilted her head as if trying to understand my words. Then she laughed, a quiet, eerie laugh. "Don't have to?" Her laughter echoed in the basement, distorted and unsettling. "I've spent my whole life waiting for this, Ethan." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "I am my father's legacy." I stared at Lena, and I saw it. She wasn't just a killer. She believed in what she was doing, with unwavering, absolute conviction. She hadn't been forced into this. She had chosen it. But I saw something else too. As twisted as she was, there was still a sliver of something inside her. Something unfinished. Something uncertain. Just enough to make her hesitate. And that was the moment I took my chance. "Lena," I said, stepping forward, "have you ever wondered if your father, if he were alive, would truly want you to continue this?" Lena blinked. For the first time, her expression wavered. "He taught you how to kill," I continued. "But he also taught you how to observe, didn't he?" I took another step forward. "Lena, look around. Really look. Do you truly see a world full of people who deserve to die? Or is that just what your father made you believe?" She didn't move. I saw her hands clench into fists, like she was fighting something inside herself. 1 minute passed, then another. Finally, Lena let out a breath. She closed her eyes, looking exhausted. And when she opened them again, the smile was gone. "I think," she murmured, almost to herself. I never really asked that question. I stayed silent. The air in the basement felt heavier than ever. Then Lena turned to James. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hands. Her voice was soft but firm. "You can arrest me now, James." I didn't know how to feel. This wasn't a victory. No applause. No sense of triumph. Just a killer who had chosen to surrender. Silently. James pulled out the handcuffs, stepping toward her. Lena didn't resist. She just stared at me, her expression unreadable. And before she was taken away, she spoke one last time. "I don't regret it, Ethan." Then she turned and disappeared into the darkness. Lena Parker was arrested without a single struggle. That was the most unsettling part. No screaming, no resistance. She just stood there, held out her wrists, and let James snap the cuffs around them. Then she turned to look at me. That faint smile, not resentful, not angry, just understanding, as if she had seen this ending coming all along. James led Lena out of the basement. I followed behind them, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on my body. Everything I had thought about this case, about the victims, about Lena herself, it had all been wrong. She wasn't the prey. She was the hunter. And the most terrifying part, she didn't kill out of hatred. She killed because she believed. She believed she was finishing the work Samuel Grayson had left behind. And I wondered, did she ever feel regret? James put Lena into the back of the patrol car. She didn't say a word the entire drive. I stood there, watching as the car disappeared down the empty road. We had stopped her. But I didn't feel relieved, because I knew this wasn't over. 4 months later, Lena Parker finally stood trial. The media called her Grayson's Imitator. She was charged with the murder of 6 people, each one fitting the same pattern as the serial killings from 20 years ago. I attended the trial. For the first time, I saw her in an orange prison jumpsuit. But what haunted me the most, she hadn't changed. Her eyes were still sharp, still calm, like she didn't believe she was guilty. The trial lasted over a month. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Photographs, witness statements, security footage. There was no room for denial. In the end, the court delivered its verdict: life in prison, no parole. She was escorted out of the courtroom immediately. No tears, no emotion, just that same faint, almost imperceptible smile. And right before she disappeared behind the door, she turned back and looked at me. "You know something, Ethan?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I'm not the only one." Then she walked away. And the last time I ever saw Lena Parker, she was still smiling. 1 year later, I left the city. I was no longer an investigative journalist. I no longer chased stories like this. James stayed behind. Sometimes he called, checking in. He told me everything was back to normal, that no more murders like Lena's had happened. But I still couldn't sleep at night, because I couldn't forget what she said. I'm not the only one. Maybe it was her final mind game. Maybe she just wanted to plant fear inside me. But every time I look in the mirror, every time I walk past a dark alley, every time I hear footsteps behind me, I can't help but wonder, is there someone else out there waiting for their turn? Thank you for watching until the end of the video. Please hit follow to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next video. See you soon, and goodbye.